statement.
Andy.
I need to sit there, the National Commissioner sits.
Oh, because it also there's the SIU.
Yes. We also want the commissioner.
Yeah.
So once sit short, we'll organize.
Okay.
I'm happy to sit. Yeah. Let's come. Commissioner, go there. We'll sort out the details. You are in uniform.
It's already.
I don't know, but that's how you wanted to do it. So you must explain to me why. Move a little bit. In fact, let's just because my issue is a side issue.
Starting with our briefing. The Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Michael Masutha, will read out his
Is it on?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Let me also immediately welcome my cabinet colleague, Minister of Health, just to explain up front that the reason of his presence is his interest in one of the aspects that we're covering today, and that has to do with the presidential proclamation. You would recall that sanctioned an investigation by the SIU into the conduct of various offices of the state attorney, which included investigation into medical malpractice claims. As you'd recall, we announced billions that the state was losing as a consequence of huge numbers of large claims that were being made under that. So at an appropriate opportunity, when we come to that point, you would be in a position to amplify on measures that they're taking from their side as the Department of Health to mitigate against what one might call the bleeding of the health budget as a result of that aspect. But Deputy Ministers Thabang Makwetla and John Jeffrey, Justice and Constitutional Development Director General, Mr. Vusi Madonsela, sitting somewhere there, the National Commissioner of Correctional Services, Mr. Arthur Fraser, Head of the SIU, Advocate Andy Mutibi, senior government officials, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, a very good morning to you all, and thank you for honoring our invitation. 2 weeks ago, during the State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa emphasized the need to step up the fight against corruption as an urgent task facing both the public and private sectors at this moment in our history. The President further said, and I quote, "The action we take now to end corruption and hold those responsible to account will determine the pace and trajectory of the radical social and economic transformation we seek," end quote. Now, in line with the above, the Ministry of Justice and Correctional Services has noted representations made at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry alleging irregularities and corrupt activities on the part of officials within its portfolio in relation to African Global Operations, previously known as Bosasa. From the outset, we wish to state our unequivocal support for the work of the Zondo Commission as an important platform for our efforts aimed at rooting out elements that, if left unchecked, pose the potential to weaken our constitutional democracy. We would like to reiterate the call to those who have information that may assist the work of the Commission not to hesitate but to come forward as part of their contribution to the President's call to end corruption. As a ministry, we met with the affected accounting officers in the portfolio of Justice and Correctional Services departments and entities to consider the implications of recent developments relating to contracts with African Global Operations or any of its subsidiaries. Correctional Services, to start there, I have in the past weeks undertaken in loco inspections of kitchens at a number of correctional centers where public-private partnerships are in place to cater to the nutritional needs of inmates. Among the centers I visited are Johannesburg Correctional Center, commonly known as Sun City, the Hoshimampuru Correctional Center in Pretoria, and the Paulsmo Correctional Center in Cape Town. In the corrections portfolio between the 2004 and 5 and 2016-17 financial years, the Department of Correctional Services and African Global Operations entered into a number of contracts as well as extensions thereof. Currently, there are about 239 operational correctional centers in South Africa with 226 kitchens catering to a population of approximately 162,000 offenders as at end of January 2019. Out of the 226 kitchens, 31 of these provide nutrition services through an outsourced service, where 26 kitchens are being serviced by African Global Operations with a population of 46,434 offenders, which is 29%, while about 754 offenders, that is 71%, receive nutrition services in-house. I may just also mention that in my observation, although African Global is responsible by and large for the operations of these kitchens, corrections officials as well as inmates also play a role in the value chain, in the catering process in those kitchens, according to my own observation when I visited. The department has been outsourcing nutritional services since 2004 to various correctional centers through competitive bidding processes. In 2006, the President issued a proclamation to probe allegations of corrupt activities in the awarding of contracts to Bosasa, namely for nutritional services, access to control, fencing, and televisions. The 2009 report of the Special Investigating Unit, SIU, in this regard, made the following recommendations to the Department of Correctional Services. Namely, disciplinary action to be instituted against the then Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Patrick Gillingham. The department to consider instituting civil. Let me just add here that there was no recommendation relating to action taken against the then Commissioner of Corrections, Mr. Mti, because at the time of this report, as I understand it, he no longer served as an official at the Department of Correctional Services. The further recommendation was for the department to consider instituting civil proceedings against Bosasa to recover possible losses. The NDPP was to consider criminal charges against Mr. Gillingham and the former National Commissioner, Mr. Linda Mti, as well as company and individuals attached to it. Since then, no criminal or civil action or proceedings were instituted. However, disciplinary proceedings were initiated against Mr. Gillingham in 2009, but he resigned subsequent thereto. DCS did not request the National Treasury to place Bosasa and its subsidiary companies on the restricted suppliers database. In light of the testimony made at the Zondo Commission, the DCS made an undertaking that all large-scale contracts would be reviewed. Following an announcement, and I may just add here, that since I took office in 2014, wherever and whenever we have come to note of any irregular procurement that had taken place, we have referred those matters either to the SIU or to some other remedial intervention, and details of that may not have been fully covered here in order to minimize the amount of content that this statement is focusing on. Following an announcement by two major South African banks, FNB and ABSA, that they would be closing the banking accounts belonging to African Global Operations on 28 February 2019, African Global Operations notified DCS of its intention to apply for voluntary liquidation. Consequently, DCS served African Global Operation with a 30-day notice to cancel the contract for nutritional services at 7 management areas. That is contract HO3/2016. This was the last contract that DCS had with the African Global Operations or any of its subsidiaries. To date, without prejudice, officials who are still in the employ of DCS who were implicated in acts of impropriety in the testimonies given at the Zondo Commission have been served with notices of served with notices in accordance with rules of natural justice to show cause why they should not be placed under precautionary suspension. Following these developments, DCS management developed and implemented a business continuity plan to ensure that the provision of nutritional services is not disrupted. The department has developed an alternative food services plan to accommodate the viability of insourcing nutritional services. As early as next week, the 8th, March 2019, the DCS will commence an offender skills development project as part of the plan towards internalizing nutritional services. Processes to transfer skilled staff from other facilities to assist where necessary are currently underway. Part of the business continuity plan includes close consultations with National Treasury and organized labor in addressing some of the challenges that may arise. It is worth mentioning that yesterday we received a report of a pending meeting between the National Commissioner and the liquidator. In addition, management is also expected to conduct a cost-benefit analysis and do a comparative study in relation to outsourcing, to insourcing and outsourcing of nutritional services within the correctional environment. Further, we wish to place it on record that the SIU is currently investigating contracts related to electronic monitoring, that is the Independent Development Trust, IDT on fencing projects, and DCS KwaZulu-Natal procurement of various services. Once the investigations are concluded, we'll once again brief the public on the findings thereof and recommended steps to be taken. Thus far, the SIU has made findings on the irregularity of contracts related to infrastructure assessment, MSW, and electronic monitoring system, EMS, which matters are currently the subject of litigation in court. Consequently, we would be unable to give further details because the cases are now sub judice. We look forward to a speedy conclusion of these investigations in line with our earlier stated commitment to deal with corruption wherever it rears its ugly head at DCS. It is the above context that we welcome the President's announcement yesterday of the establishment of the SIU Special Tribunal, which is intended to fast-track the finalization of civil litigation and speed up recovery of lost monies and assets. The establishment of this tribunal will ease the pressure in the mainstream courts. I can just indicate that the court rolls, especially in civil matters, are so clogged that it becomes difficult for the SIU to expedite finalization of claims for losses incurred by the state following investigations in terms of these presidential proclamations, and the resuscitation of the tribunal will be a breath of fresh air, because those matters will no longer serve on the mainstream court roll but will be dealt with separately at the tribunal. I may as well also just indicate that following my visit not so long ago, a month ago, to Palm Ridge Court, where I identified unutilized courtrooms, I've decided to move the Special Commercial Crimes Court that's currently situated at Elof Street in central Johannesburg to that court, so that we can take up that space and make it available for the SIU tribunal to sit. With regard to justice and constitutional development, in 2008, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development was formally contracted to Sondolo IT for the supply, delivery, installation, commissioning, support, and maintenance of a comprehensive CCTV and access control system for court buildings identified as high risk and the buildings at the head office of the department. The installation of security infrastructure under this contract was concluded in 2015, followed by a warranty period of 12 months, during which Sondolo IT continued to deliver a mandatory maintenance service. The value of this contract totaled 601,863,632. In September 2015, the contract with Sondolo IT was extended for an additional period of 36 months for corrective and preventative maintenance as per the original contract. This was also covering surveillance monitoring services in the identified high-risk court buildings and the main control room at head office. The value of the contract, which ended in September 2018, was 373,709,412, of which the total amount came to 340,738,014 rands. The security management section failed to prepare a business case and the requisite tender documents on time for the procurement of these services that is beyond September last year when the contract lapsed. And consequently, the security section allowed Sondolo IT to continue rendering the services on a month-to-month basis, pending the finalization of the necessary business case for the procurement of these services going forward. Following the delays in the finalization of this process, considering the critical nature of the service, the department was left with no option but to keep the services of Sondolo IT pending the appointment of a new service provider on a quotation basis. The process is expected to be finalized soonest, hopefully before the end of the week, and the conduct of relevant officials in the security section, coupled with serious allegations made at the Zondo Commission, has led the department to secure the services of an audit and advisory firm, Sizwe Nsaluba Gobodo, to review all security contracts awarded since 2006, with specific focus on contracts awarded to Bosasa and its subsidiaries. In terms of the contract, Sizwe Nsaluba Gobodo is expected to complete the review within 3 months. As of this morning, 25 February 2019, an official in the security management of the department has been placed under precautionary suspension following an internal forensic investigation implicating him in the irregular procurement of the services of global technology solutions on behalf of the Zondo Commission. The department has also served a letter on a senior official in security management in accordance with the rules of administrative justice to show cause why the department should not place her under precautionary suspension pending the outcome of the investigation to allegations of improper conduct, including the delay in the procurement of surveillance and monitoring services, which has led to the department ensuring irregular expenditure, incurring, somebody made an error here, irregular expenditure since October 2018 to date. The Secretary of the Zondo Commission has also been placed on special leave pending investigations into allegations of impropriety, which you may well be aware of. That's contained in the testimony given before the Commission. Investigating corruption in the office of this. Let me also just add here that you may well be aware that all commissions of inquiry are provided administrative support by the Department of Justice by virtue of the department administering the Commissions Act. And therefore, we work closely with the Commission in this instance, that is the Zondo Commission, in ensuring that there is no continuation of this irregular contract, and I'm advised that if my information is accurate, GTS, the company that had set out the security infrastructure at the Commission, has since agreed, after initially resisting to do so, to remove the equipment so that we can engage in a proper procurement of necessary security infrastructure at the Commission. Turning to investigating corruption within the Office of the State Attorney, which I think is the last topic I want to address. You'd recall that a few months ago we announced the President's proclamation empowering the SIU to conduct investigation into the conduct of certain officials within the State Attorney's Office, which in turn revealed collusion with other role players elsewhere, and that's where Minister Mtswaledi's interest is in, hence his presence here. The investigation by the Special Investigating Unit, SIU, into the allegations of corrupt activities by some officials within the Office of the State Attorney, which includes collusion, non-competitive outsourcing of state legal work to practitioners and experts in private practice, is ongoing. Thus far, the investigation has led to the arrest of a prominent attorney in Tata, Eastern Cape, relating to fraudulent medico-legal claims estimated to be over 100 million rands. The suspect has already appeared before a criminal court, and the SIU, in partnership with the Department of Health, has put a hold on the payment of further claimed amounts. The SIU and the Department of Health are opposing an application by the suspect for the release of the further payments. The SIU is considering further action, including civil action, to recoup monies already paid. SIU, 6 more criminal cases of fraud to the value of more than 90 million rands have been registered. More arrests are expected as the investigation unfolds in the Eastern Cape and other parts of the country. In Gauteng, the head of the Office of the State Attorney is currently under precautionary suspension. We have referred these matters to the appropriate professional bodies in case of the attorneys, to the Law Society, which is now called Legal Practice Council, to consider the ethical implications of the conduct of these practitioners. I may also just add that you'd recall that in a number of court cases, certain legal practitioners in Gauteng who had submitted or have been awarded legal work that was clearly the basis of some collusion between themselves and the office at the State Attorney's Office had resulted in a successful litigation against them by both ourselves as the department or as the SIU, as well as the professional bodies concerned, notably the GCB, and those matters are ongoing. Now, in conclusion, it is clear that our supply chain management system was undermined by specific role players in our environment that exploited gaps in the design of our governance system. These maneuvers have also undermined our efforts at modernizing our systems and consequently eroded confidence in our internal governance systems. It would be remiss of us not to commend the role played by the media, whilst media, whistleblowers, organized labor, NGOs, and other sectors of society in complementing the work of government in the fight against corruption. In the end, we have no other option but carry a common national obligation to build a winning nation free of all forms of corruption, including theft, fraud, bribery, extortion, nepotism, patronage, and all other ills where these are detected. We will not hesitate to act in the public interest and put an aim and put an immediate end to malfeasance. I may also just conclude by saying on my part, whenever I have not been satisfied with the actions of heads of departments or entities under my supervision, I have not hesitated to use whatever opportunity to hold them to account, and it is to this end that when I took office in 2014, I did not see why I should continue the acting stint of the acting national commissioner at the time. And subsequent to that, when the national commissioner who served before the current term expired because of retirement age, I decided not to extend his appointment because I was not satisfied with the interventions that he was making, and because of other concerns. And equally, on the side of justice, when I had to consider the extension of a previous accounting officer, looking at the challenges that I was seeing in the department, I only extended her for a year, and of course she decided to leave 6 months into that year. And I'm just trying to communicate or convey a point that from our side, we will continue to hold management accountable in ensuring that they do their part in uprooting corruption and other ills in our administration and government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we now start with our first round of questions.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Which one? Oh. Oh. Thank you very much, Minister Masutha, for allowing me to piggyback on your very important press conference but because you're going to mention issues in health, I thought it was important for me to attend, to make use of this press conference, also to warn the nation of what's taking place. It is true, one lawyer has been arrested in Tata as reported, with total claims, 6 claims, totaling 90 million rand, all of which were 100% fraudulent. And as it has been reported in your speech, 6 more arrests are pending to the tune of another 78 million. Now, what disturbs us the most is the manner in which, because this is a tip of the iceberg, the manner in which money is extorted from the state, making use of the very, very sensitive issue of cerebral palsy, which nobody wants to see happening, because 90% of all these cases in health is about cerebral palsy. Why then are we saying these issues are fraudulent? Number one, in a number of these cases, the plaintiff was not even aware that they lodged a claim against the state. They are sitting at home not knowing that there's a claim of 15 million made against, on their behalf, made against their child who is supposed to be having cerebral palsy. On inquiring why they signed, they go to them and say, we come from SASA. We represent SASA, we want to apply for child support grant for your child. Give them a blank form to sign, and believing that some child support money is coming, and go and claim. The amount they usually claim for this is in the range of 15 million. This lawyer who has been arrested for all these children, very fine, was claiming the same amount, 15 million, 93,000, 53 million, 15 million, 93,000. I don't know why he didn't even try to vary it, but that's what was happening. Secondly, quite a number of children were not found to be suffering from this condition called cerebral palsy. They were traced actually to normal schools, where their teachers were shocked to hear that this child is supposed to be having cerebral palsy, because they are like any other children. There's never been any indication that they do have cerebral palsy. The third finding was that some of the kids were not even born in those hospitals that have been litigated. They were born at home and somehow find a way to smuggle them through the hospital system and say they were born in that hospital and the hospital was negligent. Last and even more disturbing, some of the children were not even born. They never existed. These are fraudulent kids for which they are claimed. And somebody will ask, how did this come about? The plaintiffs don't have to show themselves in court because the money is paid to the lawyer. So if they win the case in court, that money is going to be paid to the lawyer, and because there's no plaintiff, the lawyer takes the whole amount. So these are the things we are dealing with, and we are very happy that the SIU made inroads. And because of that, claims worth 45 million rand has already been withdrawn. People are now starting to get scared, proving that they've submitted claims that don't exist. They are starting to withdraw them. That includes a claim of 70 million, which the SIU has not yet investigated. 70 million rand in Limpopo, just one case for a circumcision, that bot circumcision that never existed, and the claim has been withdrawn, and the lawyer thought it's the end of the case. We don't think so. We still believe he must be arrested even after withdrawing, because he withdrew when we discovered that such a circumcision never took place. So we'll go on giving you reports, meaning that the 80 billion that is being claimed from the state is definitely going to be reduced markedly, because we
your name, the name of the news house that you come from, and then your position. That's the number 1, 2, and 3.
Oh.
Hi. Karen Moore from SABC newspaper. I have 2 questions. One is for Advocate Matuti from the SIU. We know that the SIU's investigation on Bosasa was completed in 2009 and really concerned 4 contracts that occurred long before we saw the kind of evidence emerging in the state capture inquiry. In these circumstances and given the very serious claims that have been made, has the SIU approached President Cyril Ramaphosa for an extension of the investigation that you've already done to encompass the kind of evidence that's been given by Mr. Greasy? And if so, in circumstances, if such an investigation is empowered and you are able to try and attempt to recover the money involved, are there mechanisms available for you if there's evidence about the ANC, for example, receiving money to sponsor or sponsorship of party functions? Will you be able to go after the ANC to recover such funding? And then second of all, Minister Masutha, we've seen calls from Pop Crew for Bosasa staff who are currently working in the correctional services environment to be taken back in and staffed, given appointments, government positions. What is going to happen to those officials, given that the cancellation has occurred? Are you looking at any kind of integration for those members of staff, or are they simply going to lose their jobs? Thank you.
Good morning, Minister Anton Meyer from Pretoria FM. I think my question is just a question of clarity on the Sondolo IT contract that has been extended. You say that a person has been placed under precautionary suspension with regards to the surveillance and monitoring services. That's for the Zondo Commission, if I'm correct. The Sondolo IT, the fact that there wasn't tender documents or the requisite tender documents drawn up on time to replace Sondolo IT, will you be taking any disciplinary action against people in security management because of the fact or the misconduct by some of the officials working in security management? Thank you.
Captain, my name is Zengisa from the Sunday Times. I've got a question or two for Minister Masutha. First of all, with regards to the SIU report that was released in 2009, which, among other things, recommended civil action, to recoup the funds that were benefited and given from the department. Why did that not happen at the time, as you correctly stated? Now, I know perhaps it's unfair to ask that question from you since you were not there, but surely you have gotten accountability from those that were there before. And also, relating to that, you say you're looking forward to the conclusion of the SIU current investigation. Why should the public trust that this time around you will act as per the recommendations of the SIU when they conclude these investigations, if it has taken you a decade to act on the previous report of 2009? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister. Do you want to take this question, so should we go to you?
Yeah.
Hi, Giselle.
Yeah.
Are there any questions with you now?
Yes, we actually do have one.
Okay, we'll take that one.
Good morning, I'm Jenny Evans from News 24. Minister, you said you only came into your position recently, but that is still quite a long period of time. How come you didn't pick all of this up sooner and start getting money back sooner, suspending, arresting people sooner? And for example, why was the Zondo Commission contract only picked up recently when you have been supposedly working since 2009 in your department to stop this kind of behavior? What responsibility do you take for this?
Thanks, Giselle. Minister, over to you.
Maybe I should start with the last question. Why have we not acted all along? Within days of taking office, I was alerted of a contract that might have been awarded irregularly relating to electronic monitoring by the then acting National Commissioner, who apparently took over the pass of the bid adjudication committee and awarded that tender 2 days before the new government was formed in 2009. On the face of it, and based on the preliminary facts given to me, I immediately felt I needed to terminate her acting stint as acting national commissioner, and appointed a certain Mr. Modise in her place. And subsequent to that, there was a forensic investigation. This tender was destined to become one of the evergreen contracts that would, in the end, have amounted to billions of rands. As we speak, that contract, as I understand it, and the Commissioner can clarify further, was cancelled. We have saved the state money in that manner. And I can go on listing a number of other tenders which we did not deal in full here, as I explained at the beginning, where in each instance when we uncovered incidents of irregularity, those contracts were immediately referred to the SIU for investigation. Others would be in court through other processes. But if you look at many major contracts at DCS which have had this element of irregularity, none of them are currently fully operational, or even if they are the subject of ongoing litigation. So with regard to this one in particular, you may recall I got a question in Parliament in 2015 to say, why has there been no action on this? And I forwarded it to the NPA at the time for them to provide a response, which response is also on record in Parliament. To paraphrase it as with my limited memory, they indicated that they were resuscitating the investigation which was not properly done, and were replacing the prosecutor and the investigating officer dealing with that matter, and that they were confident that the matter will be dealt with in 2015 already. I must say I kept on knocking at the doors of the NPA to establish progress in this regard. At some point, the previous acting National Director of Public Prosecutions told me that the reason why there had been no prosecution is because when the SIU report was submitted to the DPCI said they will need to initiate their own forensic audit, which would have a prohibitive cost on their part, which was also not convincing to me. And as a result, even as the new National Director of Public Prosecutions took office, that is the feedback I gave her, and I said, I'm still not satisfied in the manner in which your institution has been dealing with this case over the last few years, and urged her to put it as one of her priorities to pursue this matter. This is also part of a number of other matters which the SIU has investigated, issued reports. You'd recall they made an announcement last year that there were some 686 reports that they issued, submitted to the various authorities within the NPA in terms of the Act, and where they are not aware of any criminal action having been taken. So a year ago already, I directed the acting National Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Silas Ramaite, to meet with, and he can confirm and elaborate further, the head of the SIU, Advocate Mutibi, and the head of the Hawks, to say they need to reconcile these matters, because one can understand that a case that's dealt with by the SIU would not have the same form of identification when it goes to the police, because the police issue a case number, which the SIU don't. So to reconcile which case is which and where is it, between the NPA, between the Hawks, is it in court, has investigation been concluded, has it even arrived where it's meant to arrive for investigation, etc. That is the reconciliation task that I gave to the NPA, and we're still awaiting progress report. It's another assignment which I gave to the new incumbent, Advocate Batoy, to say these are some of the outstanding matters that she needs to pay immediate attention to. Sorry for the protracted and long response, but those are the facts. So with regard to the issue of the Sondolo IT and the disciplinary action taken, I think the DG should be able to elaborate further on that. Just to indicate that there's two aspects to it. There is the Sondolo IT agreement that lapsed in September last year. And of course the DG will have to explain why it was allowed to lapse without any appropriate action taken timeously to ensure that a vacuum does not arise post-September last year, thus creating a compelling situation for Sondolo to continue to service the department. But secondly, the extent to which there may have been irregular conduct on the part of officials both at the Department of Justice and at the Zondo Commission, those matters are the subject of the ongoing investigations that have been alluded to. You'd recall mention was made of the current secretary of the Commission being on special leave, as well as officials of the Department of Justice in the security section having been placed on precautionary suspension. So that is an unfolding situation. The issue of Bosasa staff, the Commissioner of Corrections should be best placed to outline how the continuity plan deals specifically with the risk of skills gap as a result of the role that Bosasa played in the catering value chain, including the technical skills that it brought on board in that environment, and what then happens when Bosasa ceases to exist and to provide that service. I think he would be in a position to clarify that. The question whether the SIU should be asking for extension of its proclamation of 2009 beyond that period to cover the current period in the light of the revelations. I'm sure Mr. Advocate Mutibu would be best placed to comment on that. I hope I've covered some of the questions that I could, and others will be dealt with by the accounting authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to deal with the questions regarding why was it not picked up sooner that there was irregular procurement on behalf of the Zondo Commission. What members of the public may not be aware of is that the Secretary of the Commission has a dispensation in terms of which he has the full delegation equivalent to that of the Director General to run the affairs of the Commission. And in this instance, from the reports that we have, he did in fact request officials within the security management of the department to assist him in procuring services, security services, including surveillance, monitoring. And having approached officials within the department's security management, those officials, without involving the supply chain management unit of the department, in fact went ahead and purportedly procured these services, which later has been found to be irregular. So the official that has been directly implicated in the forensic investigation that's been conducted is the one that has been placed under precautionary suspension, specifically in relation to that purported procurement, which, as the Minister has now explained, there is no contract between the Zondo Commission and GTS or any of the subsidiaries of Sondolo IT. So that has now been cleared, but that official is now having to face disciplinary action, and that precautionary suspension is part of that. We will soon be drafting charges for him to answer in relation thereto. With regard to the non-preparation of the business case and procurement documents with regard to the contract that expired in September. In the statement that has been read, we've indicated that we have now served a letter requesting a senior official within the security management of the department to show cause why is it that we should not place them under precautionary suspension, pending an investigation that is being conducted, looking into the circumstances surrounding the non-preparation of those documents, including other allegations of improper conduct emanating from the Zondo Commission. So those steps are in fact being taken in pursuance of the matters that have been raised. Minister, I'm not sure whether there are any more questions for...
Well, I think there's a small correction in the statement that you have to effect. You said full delegation. I think you should have qualified it by saying up to a certain amount, isn't it? The delegation to the secretary.
No, Minister, as far as I'm aware,
Unlimited.
the secretary, Minister, is a level 16 appointment, which is a DG level, which means his delegations are the same as mine.
So there is no limit as to the amount to which you can make
there's been no ceiling to that amount. He would have the same powers as the DG. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks. Thank you, Ministers and DMs.
Can we just check if the CFO Justice doesn't have anything to add?
CFO.
Maybe I should just add to indicate that in terms of all the process and administration of the department, the Secretary has the same delegations as the DG, and the same also goes in terms of processes of procurement, where he would then, but there would be guidelines indicating the process that he should follow. So in this regard, for instance, it should go to the bid adjudication committee of the department at certain values. But other than adding that for transparency's sake, I'm in agreement with the DG.
Thank you, Minister. On the question of Bosasa staff, I think it's maybe important, firstly, to reflect that the department is actually looking at the issue of disruption of service, nutritional services. And in that regard, we have put a plan in place that if there is any immediate disruption of service, that we have trained correctional services staff deployed to the kitchens to assist and ensure that there's continuity in service. We have looked at what the critical skills that is required and that had been procured through African Global Operations. What we are doing in the immediate future is to make sure that we look at the skills gap and then contract where the department is not able to have the skill, and then over the medium term to ensure that we capacitate the establishment of correctional services so that it's able to provide those services. So with regard to the staff, we are looking at that, but it's based on the skills gap that we would have within the establishment. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister, and the Deputy Ministers, members of the media and colleagues. I'd like to respond to a question posed by Karen Moore relating to some of the testimonies that are coming out from the Zondo Commission of State Capture. As the special investigating unit, we have gone out in public to say we have established internal processes. Specifically, there's a governance committee within SIU that's monitoring the testimony at the Zondo Commission. What we have done so far, we have obtained necessary documentation, including related affidavits, obviously through the Commission channels. We are interacting with the National Treasury, specifically to assess and validate some of the evidence or testimony that comes out of there. in particular with Bosasa agreements, and I should add that any other irregularity that comes out of the Commission testimonies. On the contracts themselves, we're interacting with National Treasury, obviously, to follow up on the contract records, payment records, and once we've done that and we've assessed the evidence and we satisfied that we then need to follow a process. And that process, as you correctly say, is that we then have to follow a process that enables us to apply for the amendment of the proclamation so that we can scope it appropriately and cover the allegations that emanate from the Zondo Commission. That proclamation will follow the process as it's established. It will be processed to the Ministry of Justice, and once the Minister is satisfied, signs off, it will then be processed to the Presidency, and once the President is satisfied and signs off, it will then be gazetted. Once it's gazetted, we'll then kick off formally our investigation. And to your question, Karen, in terms of the recoveries, you would probably be aware that as we investigate, one of the outcomes of our investigations, as you may have picked up in the recommendations that we have made then, 2009, is the civil litigation where evidence points to any irregularity on the part of the state institution, and the irregularities point that there would have been losses of monies or assets. And we would then approach the courts to then apply for the civil litigation process so that we declare the contract irregular and set aside, and we would then embark on the court order to institute the recovery of lost monies or assets. So if evidence points out that the monies have been lost to any person, and I include here juristic persons, any organization, we will not hesitate to ensure that those monies are recovered. So one other outcome that we reach as Special Investigating Unit investigation is that when there's evidence pointing to criminal action, we then refer, as required by law, we refer those matters to the NPA. And in this case, again, if corruption points to any person or any organization, we will not hesitate to make that finding so that it can be processed further by the National Prosecuting Authority. I should add that we also will make appropriate findings when officials have proved that they've been guilty of misconduct in the process. We will then refer those misconduct evidence to the accounting authorities with the expectation that action should be taken. People who are responsible should be held accountable. And there would also be referral to other regulatory authorities. So, yes, we are indeed considering that aspect. And as I speak today, the indications are such that we will really consider processing a proclamation for amendment so that we can investigate all of those irregularities. So I need to just respond or compliment the response given by the minister around the cases referred to NPA by SIU. We have engaged with the NPA at the time when there was still the acting Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Dramaite, and we have made good progress in terms of reconciling our list of cases that we referred to NPA. And as we speak, there is another meeting that we will be holding with the new Director of Public Prosecutions. We've held one already on the 4th of Feb when she started, and there's one scheduled for tomorrow. So this meeting is between myself, herself, and the head of the Hawks, So the message that we are really sending out there to the public is that we are making sure that all of those matters are identified where actions should have been taken, and we will then prioritize accordingly and make sure that they go through the process. The NDPP obviously carries the discretion to decide on matters that needs to be prosecuted, but in this instance, we are of the view that should there be any need for further investigation, we are available so that we can plug in any evidence that's outstanding. In terms of the registration of the cases, the Minister has correctly indicated that formally there's a need to register a case so that it's got a case number. And that process is taken care of. Once we have referred to NPA, there's a process to ensure that the case number is registered so that the formalities are complied with before it's then taken through the prosecution process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There will now be an opportunity for follow-up questions. I see. Okay. Behind Karen will be number 1, and then number 2, and then we'll be back to you.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I'm representing TJ Mozambique. My name is Simeon Kongwani, so I would allow my colleague Kaidi to address it. Maybe I will come to that, because I'm trying to ask a question related to the former Minister of Finance of Mozambique. If you don't mind.
Now there will be an opportunity for a one-on-one outside of this briefing to deal with that issue, not part of the case. We'll take you and then back.
Thank you very much. My name is Mulukumlot from the ENCA. Minister, thank you so much for that long response. But the question was two-pronged, as per your statement here. You talked about the frustrations that you had with regard to the prosecutions. But in your statement, you are saying that the SIU recommended to your department to institute civil proceedings against Bosasa. So you are not telling us what you as the minister did. We understand that you found that report, it's been submitted to your department since 2009, you were only appointed in 2014. For 5 years, your predecessors were sitting on it. You said on it to date, because subsequent to that statement, you are telling us that since then, no criminal or civil proceedings were instituted. It was your department, as per the recommendation of the SIU, to proceed with the civil proceedings. You didn't do that. And you're not telling us why you didn't do that. And the second question goes to you, Advocate Motiti. You just told us now that with regard to the evidence that's unfolding before the Zondo Commission, you will not hesitate where you have to institute civil proceedings to recover monies that are lost. Why, seeing that the Department of Correctional Services was not implementing your recommendation, why did you not go to court, as you are promising now that going forward you will go to court? Why didn't you do it yourself? But also back to you, Minister, you are telling us that the department, your department, did not report to the National Treasury this Bosasa shenanigans to a point where it would have been blacklisted. So as a result, subsequently, this Bosasa, through its subsidiaries, continued to get these contracts unlawfully so. So in other words, do you admit that as minister, you failed in your responsibility, in your oversight responsibilities? Because you've been minister in that department since 2014, and today it's as if you only became minister last month. You are beginning to clean the road, as you told us about other things that you did.
We'll now keep down. Are there any questions?
No, not at this stage. Sorry, just following on from my colleague's question. if you look at the SIU annual reports and you look at the kind of investigations that have been instituted, there are 3 departments that seem to be very, very poor in adhering to SIU recommendations, and Correctional Services is one of them. Your own statement reveals that your department is currently facing legal action over a number of contracts. We know that they're separate, as your statement reveals, separate litigation in terms of KZN. You know, following on from my colleague's comment, I mean, how do you account for this lack of action and this lack of adherence to SIU recommendations? You are in a position where you, perhaps more than a lot of other ministers, as the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, have more of an obligation, one would argue, to show that there is this adherence to this idea that we should be accountable. When you look back and reflect on this issue, do you have any regrets, or do you have any sense in which you feel you must take responsibility for what has happened here?
There are no more questions, Minister.
Should we respond? At the very outset of the statement, I alluded to the fact that there are many other tender irregularities where we have intervened immediately this was brought to our attention, culminating in a number of processes. Pointed to suspicious irregularity, resulting in a forensic investigation being sanctioned by the department with one of the audit companies. I can't remember which one it was. Following which, because we felt that that forensic could not deal with the matter fully, because, for example, powers of subpoena are not enjoyed by private investigators to ensure that people are able to testify on oath, etc. We consequently subjected it to the SIU. And I indicated that, as we speak, that contract was terminated by the department, and there is ongoing litigation in that regard. Similarly, MSW, which had to do with with facilities at Correctional Services, upon discovering the irregular manner in which that contract was procured, that contract was referred to the SIU, and it's also the subject of litigation. And I can go on listing a few. You'd recall IMS, for example. Treasury overtook us. They decided to conduct an investigation, and they issued a report, and the successful bidders challenged that report, and as we speak, Treasury and the successful bidder, as far as I'm aware, on IMS, are currently in court over that matter. So I've filed a notice to abide to allow the two parties to resolve that through that court process. And one can go on listing a whole host of them. But so there is no contract that was ever brought to my attention as showing signs of irregularity that I simply turned a blind eye to. And I'll challenge anybody who has one to point it out to me. Now, the issue of civil recovery following the 2009 report of the SIU, as well as initiating blacklisting proceedings by the department. You see, when I studied the report of the SIU of 2009, it does not outline in what manner, in any detail, was the state put out of pocket financially. In other words, so as to determine the quantum that you would then want to recover from a company. So that's one of the challenges that you have, because we must distinguish between procuring irregularly, rendering the contract unlawful and therefore liable to termination, and the civil aspect of recovery, which can only be based on actual loss incurred. In other words, you pay money, but you don't get an equivalent value for the money you paid. There's this notion of, what is it, fair and equitable. What's the language?
Just and equitable.
Just and equitable. It has to be assessed objectively on the basis of evaluating how much did you get, what value did you get, and in exchange for which, how much you paid. So without that clear information, it becomes difficult for one to institute civil recovery. Yeah. And of course, we couldn't institute termination proceedings because the contract had already lapsed. Blacklisting. Perhaps in hindsight, one should have pressed on the department to institute blacklisting proceedings. But blacklisting as such was also not one of the recommendations of the SIU report, to the best of my recollection, either. And with a situation where you have not actually blacklisted a company, it becomes difficult to legitimately exclude it from bidding in future procurement processes. So I agree, blacklisting would have put a stop to continued procurement by a company who now, as we see on the Zondo Commission, had dubious dealings. But at the time when I was in office, and procurement, especially for the catering service, occurred, the company had not been blacklisted. There wasn't obvious, clear evidence of being put out of pocket on the part of the department as a result of the services rendered in exchange for which payment was made at the time, at least from the report of the SIU itself. Right. So it would have been something that would have had to be quantified, and perhaps it should still be revisited and an attempt be made to quantify, to establish whether the department did not in any case receive full value for money it paid. Because the contracts were negotiated on the basis of very specific items. All right? For this is how much we are prepared to pay you. This is how much you are offering to provide in exchange of that payment. So those things are clear and straightforward, and they appear to be standard and normal and reasonable, on the face of it. Right? To establish whether that actually is true value or not It's a process which ideally, when the SIU investigation was conducted, should have established, so that we can know to what extent was the department put out of pocket. All right. Like I said, I did not find it obvious in that report that the department was necessarily put out of pocket in that manner. But it's an accounting officer here. He might know better, and if the department at this stage have established anything substantial in that regard, they should be able to share with us. I think that covers the questions, unless I may have missed something in the follow-up questions.
Thank you again, Minister. I'd like to respond to the question by Moloto. As I understood, the question is, why didn't we, as SIU, take civil action to recover at the time? If you look at the legislation regulating SIU business, at the time of the Bosasa report, SIU did not have legislative powers to institute civil litigation on behalf of state institutions in its own name or jointly with the state institutions. It is only after the Judicial Matters Amendment Act number 11 of 2012, only after that act did SIU have legislative powers to institute civil litigation. So, in short, at the time, SIU would have acted ultra vires, as it's called, but that means SIU would have acted outside of the law. And hence, the recommendation was to the state institution in this regard, so that they should consider, based on the findings of SIU that the contracts were irregular, they should consider instituting civil litigations. I need to just, for the sake of comprehension, that the SIU's new strategy includes, amongst others, once the presidential report is submitted to the president, we then take it upon ourselves to follow up on the recommendations that SIU would have made to state institutions. To date, we have seen results out of that approach, but members of the public and the media would also be aware that the presidency issued a public statement indicating that from the president's office there's also a referral of reports to state institutions, in particular executive authorities and accounting authorities, and amongst others, the question is raised on what has the state institutions done to implement the recommendations of SIU. To date, since that process started, we are seeing positive outcomes where in-state institutions are indicating that either actions have already been taken, people have already been dismissed, and in instances where action still has not taken place, we would like to understand why has it not taken place so that it can take place, so that consequence management should be effected. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final comment that you want to make?
I don't know if any of my
See how they bring in other things.
No, not with you. 2012. Yeah. Only after that did we have legislative power.
Otherwise, you would have been a law unto
Exactly. We don't want to act outside of the law, you see.